depression, alcoholism, mindfulness, microdosing, marijuana. We have a unique episode for you today where we're going to bridge the gap between fly fishing and mental health. Today, we're going to find out what you can do to help yourself more or help someone who is struggling through some of the tips and resources we share today. And we have a professionally trained counselor who is going to walk us through to the sunny side. This is the Wet Fly Swing podcast where I show you the best places to travel to for fly fishing, how to find the best resources and tools to prepare for that big trip, and what you can do to give back to the fish species we all love. Hey, I'm Dave, host of the Wet Fly Swing podcast. I've been fly fishing since I was a little kid. I grew up around a fly shop and have created one of the largest fly fishing podcasts in this country. I've also interviewed more of the greatest fly anglers than just about anyone out there. Melissa Ceren, fly fishing guide and professional counselor, will be giving us the tools we need to have a better day on the water this season. Whether that's dealing with the loss of a giant trout while fishing or dealing with depression, Melissa will have some tools to help you out today. Do you need a clinical therapist? We're going to answer this today. Should we try microdosing? We're going to cover that. And where can you find a great psychologist or counselor, whether you are anywhere in this country? We're going to cover that one as well today. Plus, you're going to get her favorite go-to fly for the summer and some tips on fishing it. Changed it up today. We're keeping it fresh. Here we go. Melissa Ceren at Big Mac Fishing on Instagram. How you doing, Melissa?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for making time to put this together today. We Trout Routes connected us, and I wasn't aware of some of the stuff you had going, so it's exciting to hear. You're bridging the gap between, we hear a lot about fly fishing, talk about Project Healing Waters, lots of groups out there, and you hear about what fly fishing does for people. You're actually a professional counselor, a licensed counselor, and you use that as part of your, what you do and your kind of your day job. But you're also a guide, so we're going to talk about that in Colorado, maybe get some fishing tips out of you. But before we get into that, take us back real quick in fly fishing. How did you first get into it? What's your first memory?
So when I moved to Colorado from South Carolina, my husband was interested to show me how to fly fish. I had spin fished before, and I just really did not like it.
Yeah.
So he hired a guide for us, and we went out on the water, and I actually hated my first experience. The guide would cuss at me every time that I missed a fish and was just not super welcoming. So I kind of decided, this seems like a really hard sport. I don't think it's for me. I don't understand it. And at that time, I didn't really see a lot of female representation in the sport. So I resigned to not trying it again, but my husband asked me again, will you try to go to this Alpine lake? And there's these beautiful red trout called cutthroat trout up there. I think you'll really like them. So on my birthday, he got me a fly fishing kit, and we went up to the mountains, and I caught my first cutthroat trout, and I think I've been fishing every day since, or
really?
at least every day that I have time to.
Yeah, so the cutthroat, and were those, what are those cutthroat out there? Are those West Slope?
So I don't know for that particular drainage. They stock all sorts of different ones.
Sure.
I think those might have been Rio Grande.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. The cool thing is there's a diversity of cutthroat species, and I'm not totally familiar with the Colorado area. Oh, well, that was in Colorado where you first got the cutties?
Yeah. It was in Colorado, and we do have a native species, which is the greenback, but those definitely weren't them.
Okay. And then the guiding that seems like a big jump into the guiding. Did that just slowly, did that become, or was that a quick jump?
By, I think, a lot of people's standards, that was a quick jump. Within, a year of fishing really hard, I became a guide. I actually became a guide through the woman who first sold me my first fly rod. So I came into that shop a lot asking for help and assistance on flies to choose and places to go and stuff like that. And I was showing our shop owner, Michelle, a photo of a cutthroat trout that I had caught that prior weekend. And she said, wow, by the way, do you have any free time? Like, we're kind of short on guides. We've had someone have a family emergency. We get you licensed, etc. And so I ended up shortly after that helping out with a trip, and it went so well that she hired me on.
Wow, just like that. That's pretty cool. And what was the name of that fly shop?
It's Tumbling Trout.
Tumbling Trout, okay. Good. So you have the fly fishing going. When did maybe talk about the clinical stuff you do around counseling? Have you been doing that a while? And then maybe talk about that, how that got started, and then how you brought these two things together.
Sure. So I have been in the counseling mental health role for probably 8 years. So when I was coming out of high school, I joined the suicide and crisis hotline, which really piqued my interest in helping with crisis centers. So I started out with that. And then after graduating from college, I transitioned into doing outdoor outpatient programs, which I took groups of people recovering from drugs and alcohol into the woods for weeks at a time. And we would work on things like past trauma and coping with anxiety and depression and all that good stuff. And then after that, applied for my master's program. I went to Clemson University, did that for 2 years, got my clinical mental health counseling degree. And now I've been in the capacity of a therapist for about 2.5 or 3 years now.
Well, I'll try to today maybe keep it not like a therapy session for me, but I love that, the cool thing about this is I think, we have, shout out to Andrew, a counselor, Megan and I, we've just become, it's just a routine thing. We see him every couple of weeks and it's been really amazing. I'm not sure of how similar what he does is to what you do, but we just sit down, he helps us work through stuff, right? And I feel like it's almost like the guide is the same thing. You get a guide because you want to, or really anything in life, right? How do you get better? Well, you get yourself around people that are ahead of you a step or two. Do you feel like everybody kind of should have a counselor? Do you think that's a good thing? People should, whether you're suicidal or doing fine?
Yeah, Dave, and I actually really appreciate you sharing about your personal experience. I think everybody should have a counselor, at least at some point in their lives. And therapists themselves, all of us have had a counselor before. It's actually part of our training is that we have to see one. And whether it's working through past trauma or current anxieties or insecurities, we have nothing but things to gain from increasing our awareness of ourselves and our tendencies.
Yeah. No, I think it's great. And I mean, you mentioned the depression. That's another thing that, I think that's a very common, like how common is depression? It feels like, I know Megan, she deals with that. I don't deal with it really, I at least myself, but I feel like that's very common in this country. Is that true? Or do you think people are depressed and don't know it?
Yeah. Depression itself, there's kind of a range or spectrum on the severity of symptoms. Almost everybody I see in my clinical practice at least has some degree of depressive symptomology. Whether that fits the bill for an exact diagnosis of major depression, that's kind of another DSM-5 type conversation, which is our diagnostic manual. But we certainly all experience that, especially at certain times of our lives. So some people experience it chronically, but as you can imagine, things come up in life, grief, transitions, losses, and other ways, and those can really elevate those symptoms.
Yeah, we find it's really, especially, I'm in Oregon and it rains a lot here. It's really dark. And I've heard that the suicide rate, I think, in the country, number 1 is Alaska, number 2 or 3 is Oregon's in there somewhere, just because it's so cloudy and you don't get a lot of sunlight in parts of is that a factor, do you think, not having, because you're in an area that gets a lot of sun. Is that a reality that if you have depression, you should be finding places that have more sunshine?
I think that's a really good point. We get important vitamins like vitamin D from being outside, but also if you think about it, if it's raining all the time and you're not the type of person to want to go dance in the rain and have fun out there, you might be sequestering yourself in the home and maybe isolating from other people. So if it's not the sun itself, it might be the behaviors surrounding what you do when it's really rainy all the time.
Yeah, that's right. How does it work with, so you have a guide program, you take people out. How do you combine the two? Is that something where, people are seeking you because you do both of these things, or is it something where you're out guiding and you're sharing some tips and things like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm actually moving towards trying to understand what it would be like to integrate that into a clinical practice. So I'm having to think about contacting our licensure here. I don't want to get in trouble with,
Sure.
I'm not guiding people when I'm giving therapy. So I want to make sure that I'm not going into that realm. But as for in my capacity as a guide, oftentimes, whether it's intentional or not, I just happen to attract these conversations about things that are really difficult in life. Like, obviously, we're trying to be on vacation and enjoy time on the water, but you can't get past the fact that things do affect you, and you might be recovering from a recent loss or have other things going on, and that just happens to be the topic of conversation. And a lot of times I've noticed kind of some more or less like complexes on the water, right? So you might have a client when I'm a guide who doesn't want to set the hook because they're afraid of doing something wrong. Well, man, isn't that an entry for therapy, right? And I might use some of the skills to understand, like, what do you lose from setting the hook, even if you're not so sure?
Gotcha. So you're out there. So you use some of your clinical training while, basically guiding. So if somebody is having a problem, that is a good one. The setting the hook or the trout set is always the joke, right? You're out fishing in the salt and you're trout setting, whatever species, don't trout set. So you could actually coach somebody through that, using your clinical therapy. Is that the case?
Yeah. Oh, when we think about going to the salt in general, that poses a really big challenge for a lot of people because, you really have to set your expectations. I mean, I went on my first saltwater trip. I had no idea what to expect, but I heard about Permit and how exciting they are. But in reality, you don't have a lot of shots. So, it can be really disappointing when you've expected something to happen, but something else happens entirely. And it's sometimes within our control. Like, we might trout set on a permit, but other times, it might not be good weather or good fishing or whatever it is.
Yeah, right on. What would be if somebody's listening now and they might not be hiring you or a clinical psychologist or anybody to help out, on the water, but they want to maybe implement some of the stuff, without getting yourself in trouble? What would be a few tips you would tell somebody if they're out there fishing that they could utilize from what from your experience and your all the clinical work you do?
Ooh, okay. I would say there's a few different avenues we can kind of take this. First is mindfulness. So I think there's a tendency to, catch a small fish, and then all of a sudden you're just throwing it back because you're already thinking about chasing that next big fish. Where is it? And meanwhile, there's this beautiful little fish that you just threw back and you didn't care about. So really slowing down and appreciating not only the fish you catch, because sometimes you get skunked, but also the surroundings, the bugs that you see, the other wildlife. Maybe you might be foraging next to a stream and find morels next to some cottonwood trees. So just slowing down with mindfulness is a really important component of this, but also having awareness of what is more or less triggering a response in you that is not helpful. So for instance, if you're getting super angry about losing a fish, having some quiet reflection on, why am I having such a big reaction? This is just a fish. Do I think that I'm not good enough, or is my worth tied to my performance? That sort of things. So it can be a jumping off point of more awareness, because I think oftentimes fishing can kind of be like a microcosm to what happens in our outside lives.
Yeah, it seems like to me, a lot of people, although I have heard those stories, I just talked about a story, an old friend of mine who got mad because we were catching fish and he wasn't, and he threw his rod, 50 feet and it landed in the rocks, right? So that does happen. We've all had those moments, but I feel like most people that are fishing kind of already are thinking like, well, I'm going to get outdoors and get away from the job and not have the cell phone, right? They're already thinking that. But do you think that there's a people out there? I guess that would be one question. Do you think that's true? And then do you also think there's a lot of people that are new to fly fishing, maybe have never fly fished before, and you might be able to attract them because of your clinical work? Like, that's the picture you'd be painting. Like, hey, it's not just about catching fish. It's like, do you want to decrease your stress? Do you think that's a good talking point?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think, there's the aspect of we all carry our own stuff into whatever we do, whether it's fly fishing or relationships. So there's always going to be people who are more prone to getting, frustrated or taking themselves maybe too seriously on the water. As for the benefit for everybody, there's tons of studies that show the benefits of being outside, whether it's for your cardiovascular health, you're getting around, you're walking. It's also helping your muscles to be wading through water.
Mm-hmm.
You are getting, again, that vitamin D. There's studies that show a decrease in anxiety and depression when we're outside. There's not a ton of fly fishing studies yet, but I think we're working on that. But really, I just don't see any negatives except for maybe financial negatives.
Yeah.
The fly fishing, there's so many positive benefits that come with it.
Yeah, that's right. Have you had anybody that you've talked to about this? You've done some presentations around, my guess people are coming to those because they want to learn about that. But maybe talk about that, like on the presentations. Who has been your audience on those and what have those been focused on?
So my audience of those has also just been representative of my clients in therapy. Really, it's anybody who's ever had any sort of difficulty in their life, whether it's on the level of occasional anxiety, depression, or you think about the vets that have come to my talk with PTSD or other difficulties. So it's really a wide range, and I've given a few talks just shedding light on the benefits that we're talking about of being outside and being involved not only in the act of fly fishing, walking, and being present, but also the community aspect as well. A lot of times, it's fun to go solo fly fishing, but a lot of times at some point, we'll have connection with the community or other people on the water, or we might find that it's really helpful to be with friends on the water because there's kind of this activity we're both doing together to better ourselves and our skill level, and it can feel really collaborative. So the presentations really encompass all those different aspects.
Okay, that makes sense. So you've got that going, and it sounds like you're going to be trying to transition this more into maybe even getting certification or something like that for yourself to do this. Is that a track that you're going to be pursuing to get this so maybe you can, I'm not sure how that would work, but diagnose people more while fishing?
Yeah, I'm really interested in that. And in fact, I've just been meeting with my colleagues at my private practice that I work at for therapy, and we're talking about having intensives. So at first, before I figure out licensure and all of that when it comes to bringing therapy clients out on the water, I'm interested in just doing streamside sessions, spending a few hours with clients on the walking next to the water. I think there's tremendous benefit to just being near flowing water and moving and talking through and walking through some of the stuff that we go through.
Yeah. How do you, I think of guides, you're a guide, I think of the challenges I've guided before. And for me, it was really challenging. I was a steelhead guide, and there were times when, you would get skunked, and it was a lot of pressure on me, and it just was never fun. Do you find, like yourself, how do you utilize, what you do with your clinical stuff to help yourself as a guide? Do you find yourself using the same things to help get over stresses in the fishing, the guiding?
Yeah, Dave, that's a great question and super topical. I think as I've gained more experience both in fly fishing and in this area in general, I have really increased my confidence in my ability to get people on fish. With that being said, we're in a really challenging area. I have a lot of beginners as well as some people who fished before, but mostly have beginners that are coming here and they're really wanting to catch a fish, but you're having to teach all these essential skills and all that. So, usually it's possible, but not always. So I've really had to confront this feeling in myself of, have you ever heard of like imposter syndrome? Yeah. Feeling like, gosh, I'm not experienced enough to do this or that. Mm-hmm. I've come to realize, I know how to read the water. I know what flies to use at certain types of year. It's just building confidence in myself and setting expectations with my clients, because I'll say to them, there's a good chance we're going to find fish today, but we can't expect that we land them. We can't expect that they're eating. There are a bunch of things we can control, but also things we can't control, like the barometric pressure and all of these factors. So I've definitely had to do what I call a lot of self-talk to myself, meaning like the night before a guiding trip, I might say, I might have all these anxieties and fears come up, but I have to remind myself, I have the skills that I need to deal with the issues that come up during the trip.
Yeah.
I am a capable person, saying things like that.
That's the self-talk. So I'm trying to think of the Saturday Night Live skit. I'm not sure if you remember this. This is way back in the day. It was the one where, I'm a good person, right? It was, I can't remember the character, but it was like, I'm happy, I'm a good person, I'm successful. But that's basically what you're talking about, right? You're essentially saying positive things about yourself. And that works. That actually, how does that work? I mean, it makes sense because I think, if you say something over and over, I guess you start to believe it. But how does that work?
Yeah, so I think it's important to note that, if you try this and it doesn't work, it doesn't mean that you're broken.
Right.
Because sometimes we have such powerful thoughts that become so intertwined in who we are and how we feel and what emotions we have that it's really difficult to just change them. So I want to encourage everybody on that front.
Yep.
But just to give some understanding of why that could work is because it's based on a cognitive behavioral therapy principle. So you might have heard of CBT. This is a well-studied therapy technique or group of techniques which aim at changing your perspective. The idea is your perspective is your reality. So thinking back to when it's raining all the time, you can either go out and dance in the rain or you can say, gosh, this really sucks. I don't want to do anything, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it's all about challenging thoughts so that you can influence your emotions and therefore influence your behaviors. So for instance, if I think to myself, this client has never fished before and they seem really dead set on wanting to catch a fish, I don't think that I'm very capable. I don't think that I can do this. The emotion might be fear, apprehension, anxiety, and the behavior might be that I don't actually share a bunch of my skills because I'm fighting off anxiety the whole day. Whereas if I'm challenging it and I say, I'm capable, I remember X, Y, and Z, those times that it was hard, but we persisted and we had success.
Yeah.
My emotion will be really hopeful and excited actually for the day. And the behavior would be that I have more enthusiasm. And even if we don't catch fish, the clients will appreciate the experience because I'm bringing so much positive energy.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I think back of the cool thing about it is, I guess I like to use the sports analogies, right? You see these, I was watching a basketball game last night and, the guy made some crazy shot, some 3-pointer and just unbelievable. But it's that same thing where anybody can be capable of doing anything, right? You could be a complete beginner and catch a 20-inch trout, right? That's the cool thing about it, right? That's the cool thing about nature and sports and everything is we're all kind of gifted and have this stuff could happen. So basically you're telling yourself that it's putting you in a better position for that to happen as opposed to telling yourself bad things and you're more likely for bad things to happen. So that does. And it's called CBT, right? CBT?
Yeah, cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's funny that you just shared that about the 20-inch fish because I took a client out onto the water and she had never fished before on Saturday and she caught a 20-inch brown. Wow. And, it's some of those uncontrollables. Like it just so happened that, the fish was there. She was really good at listening to instructions, but there are certain things that me as a guide, I can never influence.
Yeah.
She very well could have fought that and dropped her rod as she's fighting it and lost total tension. And that's outside of my control.
Yeah, that's it. Do you have another story you would share where you've used some of the clinical, stuff you have, the skills you have there to, on a fly fishing trip while you're guiding?
Yeah, I'm thinking back to a trip last year. 2 clients, a mom and her daughter, and not necessarily a skill, but just the importance of listening sometimes. I mean, this individual had just lost a family member, and she had this moment where she said to me, Melissa, I just smiled for the first time since I lost my mom.
Yeah.
And I just listened to her and heard her talk about how she hasn't been able to fish or get outside since that because of the crushing feelings that came from it. And so to be able to sit there with her while creating this really beautiful memory together, she felt really heard and respected in that moment.
Yeah, that's amazing. What would be, going back to the story I was talking about, I guess anybody with depression, but what would be that example if somebody's there, they're depressed, maybe it is because of the weather, but they're just going through a period of tough times. What is a good start? What are some things you might tell that person to help them snap out of it, but work through it?
Yeah, so we actually have a clinical diagnosis for difficulties like that. It's called adjustment disorder. So that basically means you don't typically struggle with this degree of depression. There's been an event or a big change that has increased the levels of depression that you experience.
Right. Or and it could be, let's say the winter time comes and, that's a struggle. And then also maybe it's this time that your dad died, every year at the same time that happens.
Yeah. So seasonal depression or like you're seeing trauma anniversaries.
Yep.
I know this is like a cop-out answer, but go see a therapist.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Go see a therapist, especially if you don't have people who are either supportive in your life or have the capacity for being supportive. So we can have people that are really supportive.
Yeah. How would you find a therapist? My guess is, there's always the joke about the lawyers, right? There's thousands of lawyers and, maybe there's not a lot that are great, but how do you find a good therapist?
Ooh, really good question. So I recommend to everybody that asks me, and I'm not sponsored or paid by this service at all. It's called psychologytoday.com. And what's really neat about it is you can filter by your location as well as your insurance type and your difficulty. So let's say you struggle with OCD and you have Medicaid or you have Anthem and you want to find somebody in your local area. You can put all that in there. It'll populate a list of providers that support that type of insurance or are paneled with that type of insurance and have that specialty. So that helps you narrow down a list, and then you can reach out to different providers. And I always recommend, call at least 3 and feel out that first phone conversation. Do they seem like they're listening to you? Do they seem like they're trying to work with you and your schedule? What sort of experience do they have? Are they certified in advanced therapy techniques such as EMDR, which is one of the things I'm actually certified in, which we can talk about a little bit more. But really, the world is your oyster. I mean, there's a lot of therapists out there. Not all of them have availability, so definitely cast a wide net.
Yep.
And please don't get discouraged if the first person you talk to, even if you have a session with them, doesn't feel totally great. A good therapist and a supportive therapist will say, if you feel like this isn't a good fit at any point, please let me know.
Trout Routes is the most comprehensive mapping app for trout anglers. With over 50,000 trout streams, 350,000 access points, public land maps, and more, Trout Routes is the #1 resource for navigating, researching, and exploring trout streams, and it deserves a place in every angler's toolkit. I was in New York fishing recently. My first time in New York fishing, I had the Trout Routes app, and I was able to check out and access public access points through the maze of private property on the rivers we were fishing. And after I got into the stream and was fishing down through a run, I wasn't quite sure. I saw a house down below. I wasn't quite sure where the property lines ended, but given that I had Trout Routes, I was confident where I was fishing, and I was able to assure that I wasn't trespassing. You will be fully prepared with offline maps. You can get driving directions to points of interest, drop pins, add your notes in the app, all while keeping all of your data private to your account only. You can visit troutroutes.com right now to learn more and download the Trout Routes app for free in the App Store today. That's Trout Routes, TROUTROUTES. Start exploring today. What about, obviously, I think there's a big, you probably see this, the challenge of drugs, whether that's legal drugs that are pills, whatever you name it. There's that whole thing that's going on. But then you've got the marijuana, CBD, stuff like that. And there's places where, it seems like it's becoming legal, in most states, probably not everywhere. I'm guessing where you grew up, maybe not. Is it legal there? Is it legal in kind of that part of the South Carolina?
No. I'm making sure that's true since it's been a while.
So it's not legal, but it is in Colorado where you're at, right?
Yeah.
So actually Colorado, I think, was the first state. Do you feel like there's some benefits to, and it doesn't have to be THC, like even CBD, right? Do you think there are benefits for people to look into that if they've never, partaken in marijuana?
Yeah, absolutely. I always recommend, if you're going to think about an option like CBD or even, microdosing is becoming a lot more popular. Make sure that you're, in contact with your medical providers about that. So for instance, if you have a family history of psychosis, if you utilize marijuana, you can actually increase your odds of developing a similar difficulty. So it's really important that you're being honest and transparent with your providers. I think there's some shame or people feel like they have to hide the fact that they
right, like the drinking, like how much do you drink, how many glasses do you have, and you're always like, oh man, just one, right. But you actually had probably more like 3 or whatever it was.
You just don't gain anything from lying. And I think a lot of people think that therapists are angels and they've never tried drugs or alcohol before, but that's just not the case.
No,
our job is to help you, and if it's that you're actually drinking a lot and it's affecting your life, like, we need to know that so we can help you. It's not that we're going to say, oh, you have a problem, you need to get help. At least my perspective is, how is drinking or using marijuana or whatever it is affecting your relationships or ability to show up to your job? I mean, is it causing issues? And if not, we don't have to really focus on it.
Right. What if you have a family member, and this might be out of your range of, expertise, but you have a family member that's really struggling with lots of stuff, maybe that's a brother or sister or somebody, but you can't really get to them and they're kind of, killing themselves essentially. Like, what is the tip there as when you feel like, man, there's not much you can do at the end of the day? Like, what would you tell that, the person trying to do something to help?
I honestly just want to start out and say, if you're listening right now or you're thinking about somebody who has a family member who's experiencing this, it's really hard. Because obviously, we can say, you need to go into a program, like, how can we help you to do that? But at the end of the day, sometimes we can't really force anything to happen, especially if they're, above the age of 18 and can make their own choices. And at the end of the day, if we force them to, let's say, give up alcohol, how long is that going to last? We're not going to be supervising them every day of their life. They're going to make that decision. And whether it's killing themselves or damaging a lot of their relationships, they have to make the choice to choose a different path or not. And unfortunately, that becomes the demise of some really wonderful, beautiful people.
Yeah, no, I think that was my take on it. I think that, sometimes there's not much you can do. You do your best. What about, are kids in your expertise? Do you work with kids? Is that a whole nother level of, issues there? Or is that, maybe starting there, do you work with kids or is it mostly adults?
I work with teens.
Yeah.
I used to work with kids and more teens, but it's a really, really difficult demographic because not only are you working with the kiddo, but you're also working with their parents. And sometimes you're working with DHS because there's abuse in the home. And that just wound up to be not my thing and my specialty. But I absolutely appreciate all the providers out there who fill that need because there's a lot of kids that need support.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I wanted to give a big shout out to Brandon. We did an amazing trip with the Mossy Creek Fly Shop out in Virginia. This is our trout school, kind of East Coast trout school. And Brandon was this amazing guy. So the way we do these things, we do kind of a giveaway and then we sell some spots for people to go out and, go to these places. And Brandon was just a super awesome, bigger than life guy. You know what I mean? Like, he just loved fishing so much. But his background was, really amazing. Like, he worked for high levels of the federal government, like counterterrorism. He was telling us stories about this. But the one thing he did that he really loved and he took this thing on was he worked with, it was essentially kind of like sex trafficking for children, something like that, right? Some really nasty stuff. And he said he really, was able to move the needle and really take some people down, right? And so I feel like, just that, it's this whole thing of there's terrible stuff going on out there, right? I think most people are actually good people, but I'm not even sure where I'm going with that. I guess the shout out to Brandon for that. But do you feel like there's people that are just meant for certain jobs, that even though they're like the toughest things? Do you feel like that's how you are?
Yeah. Oh, I like to think that I've found a really good niche for myself. And the reason I feel that way is I just feel really in line with my intuition and my ability to connect not only with people, but with nature. I feel like those are really big strengths of mine. And whenever we're able to choose a career or multiple careers, as I have, that are in contact with those strengths, I think the more fulfilled and purposeful and happy that we end up being.
Yep. There you go. Well, good. So I think we've gone down this track a little bit. I mean, I think it's obviously there's a bunch of information here. We're not going to go deep into it. But if somebody wanted to follow up more and learn more about this, if they were dealing with depression or had family members, is the Psychology Today, is that a good place to start for anybody listening now?
So there's Psychology Today, which helps you get into contact with therapists. There's Crisis Line. So if for whatever reason this podcast put you into a crisis or made you feel like I really need to talk to somebody, but I don't have a therapist right now, you can actually either call the National Suicide Line, which is for people who are suicidal and also for people just in crisis, or you can contact your local crisis line, which I think is different for every state, the number.
Oh, okay.
So there's that. And then if you're wanting to support family members, a really good organization for that is called NAMI, NAMI. And they offer different services depending on where you're located. A lot of them have peer support groups. But I would just say, do some research because you'd be surprised at how many resources are out there to help people who are experiencing really, really similar things to you.
Yeah. Do you, we're going to get into some fishing here in a little bit, but I just want to add some interested, do you find that the United States, have you looked at this? Is there more per capita? Do you find more of these issues in the U.S. because of our lifestyle? Or do you feel like it's pretty much around the world, everybody deals with this stuff? It's not much different.
I actually don't know the research on that. Yeah. I want to say that I have heard that it's higher in the United States, but I might just be thinking about gun violence.
Oh, right. Which, gun violence for sure.
Is a whole other thing.
Yeah.
So I can't really speak to that right now.
Yeah, that's a whole nother, gun violence and everything. So we're not going to go obviously into all of that, but let's jump into some fishing because I want to leave people with some tips here. You fished the South Platte and some other rivers and lakes around there. We've had, a number of great guests on, Landon Mayer, Pat Dorsey, others, that have talked about fishing Colorado. Let's take it there. Let's take it for a beginner. Let's see somebody, and a lot of people listening have been fishing for, more than, they're not beginners, but if somebody was coming to you, they're brand new, what's the first step, when they come to the shop or whatever to get them started?
So I always recommend if you have the financial ability to hire a guide because a lot of us have been in our area for years. We fished the same water for years. So we really know A, the spots, but B, what is successful in the area. So when you take a guided trip, oftentimes you get to rent gear. So you'll have the guide's rods and the waders and everything. And if it's something that even just a little bit sparks some excitement or interest, you can buy some lower end cost rod kits, which have your rod, your reel, your line, everything's already all set up. And then, if it's the summer, you don't even really need to buy waders. No. So, if it's winter and you're wanting to start, you might want to buy some waders or else you're going to get really cold. But I would say do a guided trip, and then before or after or both the guided trip, watch some videos online about ways to improve your casting technique or your ability to read the water. Yeah.
So do a little research beforehand. So, and the guide is definitely something that we've noted for sure. So that's a great one. So once they get a guide, once they maybe do some practicing, of the casting, what would be another beginner tip you would tell somebody once they have their gear, they're starting to learn to cast a little bit? What would be the next thing you would tell them?
Honestly, just put time in on the water.
Yeah.
I mean, nothing is a better teacher than experience, and you're going to find things that work and things that don't work. You're going to find, when I am paying attention to this, like for instance, if I'm paying attention to depth and I'm moving that around, I'm more likely to contact a fish when I'm at this depth. So changing depth is really important. But also, you lose a fish and you start to ask yourself, why did that happen? And you might look up or ask a friend, like, how do you fight a fish better? Because I don't want to lose another nice brown or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so then next time you might, try to turn the head of the fish by dropping the rod towards, horizontally towards the water and turning the head and being aware of water tension and all that stuff.
Right. Perfect. Well, we're going to start to take it out of here. We're going to use our mental health shout out segment. This one we mentioned at the start, presented by Trout Routes. And I think trout routes is something we're talking about mental sanity. Trout routes, I think, helps you a little bit with that, right? Because not only keeps you from getting lost, but keeps you from getting in trouble. But talk about trout routes a little bit. Have you used trout routes, and what is it that some of the features maybe that you've used?
Yeah, so I'm newer to trout routes, but I've started to work with them because I've tried a few different apps and found that their interface was just really easy to navigate.
Mm-hmm.
I've used it quite a bit to find streams and rivers that are not as often fished. So whether it's the stream itself or just access, that's a really good place to find those things. And especially being in Colorado, we have really strict private property rules. And there was a case, I believe, where a gentleman was shot because he walked onto private land. So we take it really seriously. And I use that to make sure, am I on public? And it's happened quite a bit where it says private, and then I'll look on trout routes and it's not actually private. So they're really good at keeping up to date information on what the land is owned by or who the land is owned by.
That's right. No, that's one of the features I love too, being able to know for sure whether you're on public or private. That's a good one. And and the access points. I think last time we talked to Zach, they've got thousands of access points. And I think they're adding more layers and, even more content as we go. So that's a good one for sure. And I'm looking at the South Platte. I just searched up on trout routes. I just put in South Platte River. Now, where is it on the South Platte? Is that a pretty large system, long river system?
It is. And there are different forks of it. It runs for quite a bit and between reservoirs and such. So there are a lot of different access points.
If somebody was coming in to fish with you, where would you potentially be? Is there an area? Are you covering everything, or do you have specific areas that you're fishing?
So we'll fish areas like the Terrial, which is a really sweet little fishing creek that runs from a reservoir. But there's also the South Platte, so things like the Dream Stream or Spinney Reservoir, Ontario, 11 Mile Reservoir, all those big reservoirs in the area up to Fair Play, and have some smaller streams up here, Alma.
Mm-hmm. Are you guiding throughout the year, or are there certain areas when you're guiding more?
I'm definitely guiding more spring through fall, with a heavy focus in the summer. A lot of people are coming out to Colorado because they want to, go into the mountains or whatever. And it just so happens that that's a great time for us, except for when it gets too hot for the fish. Unfortunately, we've had a lot of hot summers, so we have to stop fishing at certain points of the day because of the heat. But yeah, as of like last week, 2 to 3 trips per week.
Oh, okay. So what's going on? Let's maybe take us around a little bit on, now it's May, it's going to be June, kind of what's going on in May, June, as far as, are there some hatches going on pretty good now?
Yeah, so we're starting to see some caddis action, a little bit of BWO. It's still a little bit early in terms of it's been really cold. And we've also had an interesting year in terms of snowpack and runoff. We actually haven't really started runoff where we are. In the snowpack in some area, like one of the passes near us is at 180%. So it's going to fill a lot of our reservoirs and we'll have hopefully some really good, healthy flows moving forward.
Gotcha. I'm trying to get, I've been up in that area, but the South Platte, it goes, when it goes, are you near Denver? Like, where's the shop that you mentioned? Which town is that in?
So that's in Lake George. The closest city to that is Colorado Springs.
Oh, okay.
And then our shop is at the mouth of what's called 11 Mile Canyon.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Right on. And 11 Mile Canyon. It's Lake George, Colorado. Good. I'm just trying to get my bearings. Oh, yeah. Way, way on the other end. That's it. Okay. I'll have to do a little bit of research. But yeah, it's a massive system, obviously. And so what are you doing most of the time? Are you doing a mix of dry, nymphs, kind of a little bit of everything? Or are you trying to, focus on one or the other throughout the year?
Yeah. So whenever possible, I try to get clients to use dry flies. But obviously, sometimes of the year, that's just kind of silly. Like in the winter, you could use like a Griffith's gnat, but even then you're not having a ton of fish rise, especially when it's really cold. So I'll run a hybrid approach for like a Euro nymphing / like a typical setup. So it's using heavier flies, but a longer leader, which helps clients who haven't mended before to understand and to be able to fight a fish effectively with a 10-foot rod. So this time of year, I'm seeing some rises in the hotter parts of the day, sometimes like late morning, early afternoon. But generally, I'm nymphing right now with clients.
Yeah. And the Euro nymphing obviously is popular. Do you see a lot of people, is that the most effective? Do you see a lot more Euro nymphing anglers out there?
I think it's increased a lot in the last couple of years. I myself, I picked it up within the past year and have had a really good mentor who's also a good friend teach me the ins and outs of it. And it's so effective. It's really fun, and it feels really in contact with the fish and the ecosystem. You realize the moment that something, hits or affects your flies, you're going to know it right away.
Yeah, exactly. What's coming up as you look out, this year, anything you're getting excited for trips, for fishing, anything coming up in, the rest of 2024?
So definitely Alpine lake season in the summer. I mean, there's endless trips around Colorado where you can go out. We recently, last year, got a camper. So we're going to be spending quite a few days out in Colorado this summer. But then in the fall, my friends and I, my girlfriends, we're going to Charleston to go redfish fishing, which will be so fun.
Yeah, that's going to be awesome. What kind of camper? I'm always interested in the campers. What did you get? A small one, a large one? What type of deal do you get?
Yeah, it's called a new camp, and it's a teardrop sized camper.
Yeah, teardrop. So it's got just enough room for a bed and kind of everything, but not super huge.
Yeah, so it has a bed which sleeps two people, and then the dining room table actually transforms into another bed, so you can sleep one more. But we just bring our dogs along, so we have two dogs that we stuff in there as well.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, the camper is a cool. And the cool thing about it is, you could take it, especially out there in the wintertime, right? You could park along the creek and hang out and fish and have a nice warm place to come back to.
Yeah, nobody likes to camp during the winter, so it's nice to be the one, only ones out there.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so you got that going, and then as far as your guiding, you're just going to continue doing more of the same. What is the big, if you look ahead the rest of this year into the fall, what do you think is the most popular hatch in that area that people are kind of coming for?
A lot of people, gosh, that's a really hard question.
Or maybe it's not a hatch. Maybe it's just is there a time of year, an area, or that people are coming? It's so popular. I guess there's people fishing there throughout the whole year.
Yeah, I mean, I catch a lot of my good fish in the winter, but you have the caddis hatch, the blue-winged olives, you have tricos, which we have a great hatch where we are. A lot of people really like, especially newer clients, really like fishing with grasshoppers in the middle of summer, is the fish just slam those things. So it really just depends. I mean, dry fly fishing is so fun, and to understand all the different components to the life cycle helps you to understand how to catch fish better. And of course, different times of the year have different hatches as a priority to fish flies with.
Yeah, the hopper is awesome. What's your hopper pattern? Do you have one that you love for the hoppers?
I use a lot of Amy's ants.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to think. There's like a reddish color one that I really enjoy, but up at Alpine lakes, if fish are hitting the surface, I'll use something like a big chubby Chernobyl, something really goofy. It's just so fun to watch the fish eat this ridiculous looking bug.
Yeah, that's it. Do you ever use a royal wolf?
I use that a lot for brookies.
Oh, you do? Yeah.
Yeah, they seem to really like that, but
yeah.
I'm sure, cutthroat are really surface oriented, although, you can absolutely get them on nymphs. I'm sure that would work really well with them.
Yeah, I've been talking up. I had a moment with a royal wolf, which I don't typically use, but I used it on that trip we were out in Virginia, and I had this really cool moment on a spring creek and all that. So it was good. But yeah, I think that goes back to the saying, right? You never know. It's good to have a mix, and especially those areas that are highly pressured, right? Do you find that trying something out different is something a smart move out there?
Yeah, it could be. I'm thinking to this Alpine lake that is really highly pressured near me, and a lot of people use nymphs or they try to use hoppers. So I was like, well, I may as well try a beetle pattern. I don't see a lot of people or hear a lot of people using a beetle. And I had a cutthroat trout go from like 10 feet. Like I could see him all the way down. 10 feet all the way up to come eat my beetle. So it just makes you think, do they get so accustomed to the same looking flies that something a little bit different, although not totally outrageous, might work better?
Yeah, I got it. Well, as we head out of here, maybe think back to what we talked about today, kind of going full circle. What would be a few takeaways you would tell somebody? We talked a lot about mental health, mindfulness, helping people. Anything you want to leave folks with as they're heading out to be, either mindful of, helping themselves or others out there that are struggling maybe?
I think I want to say something about community, whether it's yourself or somebody else. Don't be afraid to reach out for support. And that also comes with checking on your friends. Somebody who seems really happy and positive all the time might have a really different life behind the scenes. So, asking somebody not just like, hey, how are you doing? And moving on, but hey, how are you really doing? I know this happened recently, or the winter's really hard. Like, I just want to check in and see how you're doing, or, whatever it is. We're really good at hiding these things, which is quite silly of us humans because we all deal with something similar. So I guess my advice would be, don't be ashamed of it and reach out to the proper support. And when I say proper support, that means people that are kind and loving and respectful, and people that you can trust to keep your information safe or to make you feel heard.
No, it's well put. And we have a membership group that we're kind of kicking off again, and I think this would be a good opportunity, to have something like this where people can kind of in the community come around and maybe have, a space or something like that for people to talk about this, right? If this is something, because like I said, I know that this is something that I've struggled with. I've had family members basically that have committed suicide, that's so that, and I think we all, alcoholism is so prevalent, it seems like, right? There's all these things that are, and then we all, it seems like in this country, work a lot, maybe too much too. And you see the homelessness. How do you, when you see all this stuff, this goes back to, I guess, these things, even like the conservation, but how do you stay positive when you think of all this terrible stuff that's going on out there?
So what I always go back to is that there's only so much that we can control. And we also have to take care of ourselves first before we take care of other people. And so if it needs to be that you need to take a day off and go out on the water so that you can come back and feel rejuvenated and meet people with love and compassion, it starts sometimes on that level of, a person who has never experienced love and care before, and you just meet them with that same sort of grace and love. That can really be a landmark moment for that person. So just being really intentional about the energy that you put out to other people and in the world, and just trying your best to be a good person and to support causes that are A, successful, and B, targeting the things that you feel are the most present in your community.
And what would be a cause that you think would be worthy of supporting that are out there maybe in this field or something similar?
One organization that's coming to my mind is called Fishing the Good Fight. And they work a lot with gentlemen who are struggling with mental health or mental illness. And I know you can donate, or you might be able to volunteer or do something like that. So there's that. And then there's, Project Healing Waters, which helps vets. Yeah. If we're thinking about fly fishing specific, there's a lot of good avenues of already established organizations that do a really good job on their missions.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's all sorts of great groups out there. So those, and I hadn't, I think we had heard of the Fishing the Good Fight. We'll put some links in the show notes to that as well. And let's leave it on definitely on a good high note. I always love to get a little music or podcast out of a guest if I can. So when you're on a road trip, you're in this, you got your camper, you're pulling your teardrop behind. What are you listening to? Are you listening to a podcast or are you listening to music?
I tend to go for music. I've been in a Billy Strings phase recently, so that's just been kind of on.
Okay, Billy Strings. This is like a string band sort of stuff, like bluegrass.
Is it?
Oh, perfect. Good,
yeah.
Good. All right, we'll put some Billy Strings out there, and if we can remember, maybe we will get something on Instagram there on a story or something like that. So cool, Melissa. Well, we didn't mention this at the start. I'll put this link in the show notes as well. But big_Mac_fishing on Instagram. Is the best place people can track you down. And I just want to thank you for coming on and sharing all the, the tips and really, what is Not an easy thing to talk about all the time, right? We all have these struggles. So I appreciate you for doing the good work, and glad I was able to talk to you today.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for having me, and thank you all for listening. I really appreciate it.
There we go. That was some deep stuff. We sprinkled in a little bit of fishing, but definitely Melissa's doing some great work out there. Definitely check in with her. If you have a chance, let her know you heard this episode. You can find her at big_Mac_fishing. And my question for you is, a Big Mac or a Whopper? Which one are you choosing? Okay, that's the question. That's the question of the day. Please follow this show and share it if you can. If you know anybody out there, please share this episode or anyone that you enjoyed in the past. That's how we grow this show here. That would be amazing. Okay, one quick shout out. We mentioned a little bit the group at wetflyswing.com/pro. This is a re-kickoff launch of Wet Fly Swing Pro, which is called The Shop. This is where we're going to be bringing everybody together. We're going to be having some community events, traveling, trip discounts, you name it. We're going to have some great resources. We might even bring Melissa in here if she's available to talk to some folks if there's some interest. You can let me know. That's what the group's all about. Wet Fly Swing Pro, The Shop. You can do it right now. Sign up, and I will follow up with you when we launch this thing. It's coming up very soon. This is right around the corner. And I'm going to be opening up just for a small group of people. So if you're listening and you want to get involved in this, you can also send me an email, dave@wetflyswing.com, and I'll follow up with you with some details on what you can do to learn more and to get started. But we're just going to grab a small group of people to kick this off. This is a paid membership, and it's just going to be an awesome place to connect with everybody. All right, that's all we got today. Hope you have a great afternoon, great evening, or great morning, wherever in the world you are, even if you are on the very tip of an island with no cell phone coverage. You're listening right now because you downloaded this episode. No matter where you are in the world, I appreciate you for stopping in today, and hope to talk to you soon.